The Build Show Build Boston series is sponsored by Allura Fiber Cement Siding, Mitsubishi Electric Train US, Roseburg, Schuco USA, and Warmboard.
Hey, Build Show. You got it. Steve Basic Architect. Build Show Build Boston site. You're in for a treat today. We're talking gypsum board and plaster. Notice I didn't say drywall, where we're going to tape the joint and do the typical things that you see happening around the country. Up in here in New England, we do things a little different. So you might be in for a little treat. So stick around. We got quite the story. We got Mike from MJR and Sons Plastering. They're out here. We got full crews. We're hanging board. We're plastering. We're doing the whole story here. So sit back, relax. I'm gonna go inside, catch up with Mike, and we're talking board. All right, so we're inside. Mike, pleasure to meet you, sir.
How are you?
Thank you for taking the time. I know you guys are busy. You know, it's a funny thing when I go onto the job site, like there's a lot of subs, and I'm not trying to indict all the other subs.
Sure.
But when it comes to building construction, I think like boarders and plasters and roofers are probably the hardest working guys out there. Like they're just seem like they're always on the go.
Yeah.
It's like we're gonna go down there and we're gonna check out your install, and it's gonna be like an ant farm.
Yep.
Like there's just guys going.
All the time.
Everybody has their own job to do. Guys cutting board, delivering it. It's crazy. So you know, I commend you guys on what you do. But
Well, we would say that we would probably the hardest working subs because our material actually controls us. It's a time limit. So once that plaster hits the water, we have an hour and a half until that is rock solid. So
right.
Once
And
it hits the water,
going.
there's a process.
You got to keep going. So, owner of MJR and Sons.
MJR and Sons
right?
Plastering, yes.
Now, I'm not going to ruin it. I'm going to let you tell the story, but tell the story.
So our family has been plastering since 1932. My great-grandfather. My grandfather had a union shop for 40, 50 years. My father actually started MJR and Sons in 1983, okay. And now I'm lucky enough to kind of keep it going.
Take over the system.
Keep it going. So.
But 1932, that's 91 years?
It's getting up there.
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhere around 90 years.
It's been
I'm
getting
not
up
going to
there.
do the math for you guys.
No, we've been doing it for a long time, and our whole family's involved. My uncles are plasterers. He has a company up out of North Conway. My other uncle has a company out of Boston. So it's a family.
So this is one of those
affair.
deals where like you guys get together at Thanksgiving and you just all talk about the bad clients and the horror stories.
And my mother and my aunts and my wife will all say, "That's it. There's no more plaster talk at the table."
Let's not talk about it anymore.
That's it. You know?
So no, I commend you on that. Fourth generation. Wow.
Yep, fourth generation.
That's awesome. You got to be proud about that too, right?
No,
I mean, having that storyline.
Absolutely.
You don't meet many people that, you know, can sit there and say, oh yeah, my great grandfather,
yep,
you know, started this business and doing it. But so we're up here obviously in New England.
Yep.
New England is a little unique.
Yes.
In the board and plaster world, right?
Yes. Yes.
We do a veneer plaster instead of the standard drywall, which is treatment of corner joints, and any horizontal or vertical joints and nail heads.
So when somebody mentions the word sheetrock or drywall, what they're referring to is the gray board. They do just the joints, just the screw heads. It's a 3-coat system, and they paint it. Where what we do is we actually cover every square inch of the house. So when our plaster base is installed, which is the blue board, it has that bluish tint to it.
Right.
We cover every square inch of the whole entire house. After we treat the joints first, and then the finish is applied on top.
Gotcha. And this is a National Gypsum product.
National Gypsum, yes.
Right.
We use National Gypsum board. The bags, the system works well together. The board stands up well to the weather. Some material tends to, humidity for instance, the board can start to turn into kind of mushy almost.
Yep.
This board always works very well. The plaster receives it very well. We don't usually have any problems.
I wonder if they were around when your great-great-grandfather started. He probably started with like real plaster on like wood lath or something.
My great-grandfather, they did the wood lathe, and they went to the rock lathe. My grandfather actually remembers when the first time they actually got
when board started.
When board started, and they didn't have boom trucks. They had to carry everything in piece by piece.
And that board wasn't 4x12 sheets. If I remember, that was like 16-inch by like
2 feet.
2 feet.
That's the rock lathe they refer to. That's the rock lathe. And then in the 60s, the 70s, Blue Board kind of took over into the 4x8 and 4x12s. That was the
Gotcha.
That was the
Gotcha. So you mentioned this is blue, the other one is gray. Is there something that's happening on in this paper?
So this paper is designed to draw the moisture from the plaster into the board, into the gypsum, into the limestone. That actually holds. That's what makes the bond between the plaster. So if you put plaster, a water-based plaster, onto drywall, it slides around. It doesn't remove the water at all, so it won't set properly. So this paper, the chemicals.
So it's almost like a blotter.
Yes, it slowly pulls the moisture, and then as you'll see when they're troweling it, they trowel it over the course of an hour, and you get that nice hard finish at the end.
And what's interesting, since you mentioned that, having done remodeling jobs, if you go into a house that has had plaster and do remodeling, you can't pull the plaster off the board.
No.
When you pull it, the paper face comes with it.
The paper will go with it.
And then you're left with just that gypsum core
Yes.
when you're doing the remodeling. So it makes total sense that blue paper is a chemical bond
That is.
with the plaster. So the plaster that we're using is this Unical product.
This is Unical veneer plaster. When it's finished, it's anywhere between an eighth to a 16th to an eighth of an inch thick.
Okay.
I personally like Unical. It sets a little faster than some plasters, but when it dries hard, and it dries with a real nice finish on it. You'll see when they finish, it has a glassy-like finish
Gotcha.
to it.
Gotcha. And obviously it goes up, it's a white product.
Yep.
And it just mixes with water, right?
We just mix it with water. You just mix it with cold water. Warm water will make it set in about 15 minutes, but cold water, Unical plaster.
Stays workable.
It stays workable between an hour to an hour and a half.
Okay. Now, one of the things I noticed on the board, it might be a little hard to pick up, but you can see there's pretty much a line here I would say that's probably about 2.5 inches.
Yes.
And that line runs the length of the board. Understand that it's on the factory finish. And what it is it's actually a built-in taper. And but that taper is made so that when I have a mirrored board here,
Yes.
abutting it, I have that little crevice that we can then tape.
Fill in, yes.
And then that tape kind of fills the void, or this void is created so that you don't get a bump in the plaster. You can actually, that veneer is going to stay nice and flat.
Yes, this will be a hair thinner than the actual field of the board, and that allows us to just fill that seam and then put the finish on afterwards.
And speaking of tape, it appears that's your tape of choice.
This is our mesh tape. Yes, this is the 500 feet of mesh we use. We use these on any time a board meets a board. So corners, inside 90s, all the flat tapes that we hit. So any joint.
But yeah, so if you could see this, when he says mesh, it truly is a gridded mesh. I mean, that's probably like, I don't know, about 3/32 of a grid there, and it's a square grid pattern.
And that grid allows the plaster to get through it, obviously, and get behind it.
Yeah.
And that's where it makes the bond. Whereas in drywall or sheetrock, they have a paper tape. It's a solid face tape.
Yeah.
Now they'll put the mud behind the paper tape. Paper tape gets installed into the compound, so it kind of gives it that. It's a different application when it comes to drywall. This, we want the mud in it and through it, and it actually makes that tight bond all the way through.
Do you guys do drywall too?
We do drywall from time to time. Like, if for one of my contractors, like if LDS has a commercial job, we can do it. My board hanger, Marcelo from H&M Drywall, he actually is a finisher too. So he does steel stud. He'll install my drywall, and he also can do the finish tape.
And the thing about this is, it actually has a like sticky. It's got an adhesive coating on it. I don't know if I can get this. It's gonna try and unroll because it's not there, but you can see when I pull, it takes a decent tug.
Yes, it holds. It holds. Especially in the heat, when it's warm.
Yeah.
When it's warm, that adhesive really acts.
I mean, that's tugging on it. So you put it up, and it basically stays in place there. So
we make sure we always tuck it, so when you put it into the corners, you can't have the adhesive hit both sides. So we tuck it nice and tight. That way, that 90-degree inside corner is.
Now, I know you just mentioned it, but do they make a paper tape for plaster?
No, because the paper tape, what actually happens is if you use paper tape and plaster, the plaster doesn't bond to the blue board.
I got you.
And then the joint will end up kicking.
So you're creating a barrier to the reaction that the board wants to have with the board. You know, I never really knew that. I thought it was a choice because you see some people using tape, you see people using mesh.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was necessarily directly tied to what type of finishing.
Yeah, we want that. We want that plaster on that blue board to make that grab, and in the mesh really it works as like a rebar or a sheet a sheet mesh that actually helps reinforce that joint. As the house moves and it settles, it just gives a little bit more strength.
Now, what about if I put blue board up? Is there a way that I can, if I just treated it like drywall?
You would have to. You could do that. You would have to just paint it a lot. You'd have to really paint it a lot.
Okay.
And one of the main differences in the blue board and the plaster, the drywall and the plaster, is that when you look at a drywalled ceiling or a drywalled wall,
yes.
That just has the seams and the screw heads, you can always see the difference where the joint finishes and where the board finishes. The board all has a little bit of a hair to it.
Yeah, you can see it's almost like a very micro cloth surface.
It
Like
has a little bit of a fur.
Yeah.
So that fur behind paint will flash. So you'll see, because the compound, when they do drywall, finishes nice and smooth.
Right.
So that area is smooth, and then you have a couple feet of this, and then you have a joint, and then you have a couple feet of this. So it'll flash a lot, whereas plaster, when it's painted, there's no seams, there's no screw heads, and
Right.
it just shows right through.
And I know, I have friends in Texas, we do projects all over, and some of them will say level 5 finish, where they basically put a plaster coat over the whole board to get rid of
Yes.
that.
So a level 5 finish in drywall, they end up making that wall like a projector wall in an office.
Yep.
They need to be level 5. So when the image goes on the wall, it doesn't look distorted. So what they do is they'll fill it with every little nook and cranny. It's really just like plaster. When we do a level 5 in plastering, we end up using a base coat. So it's actually an extra step that we add on to get that level 5 finish, the two coats.
Right, and you had mentioned it. So we're standing in this large great room. We're talking a ceiling that's probably on the order of, I don't know, close to 30 feet by about 24 feet.
Yes.
And you say you treat that different. So
the large ceilings we'll treat a little bit differently. What we want to eliminate is any kind of up and down, any kind of rolls in the ceiling, which
Right.
the frame is done well, it's done perfect, but it's just lumber. So there is natural rolls in it. So what we do is after we install our blue board, which we usually will use a 5/8 board on the big ceilings, on all ceilings, but it takes away a little bit of that roll with the 5/8. It's thicker, it's stronger. And then we apply a base coat. So what we'll do is we find any kind of high and low spots with a straight edge, with a level or a straight edge. If we find a little bit of a high spot, we'll mark it, and then we fill it with base coat. So we'll leave the high points alone, and we fill the whole cylinder.
So it's almost like it's a leveling compound.
It's a leveling, yeah, but it's a cement based. It's cement. It's heavy. So
it's not like the plaster that's
No.
more of like a slurry
Yes.
or a true mud. Like this is when you mix this up, we'll look at it there, but it's almost like a extremely highly refined mud.
Yes. It looks like ice cream when it's mixed. It should
Yeah,
look like ice cream.
it should
you know.
look- there you go.
The base coat will have more grit and more aggregate in it. So that aggregate, but we fill it all, and then we'll apply the finish coat, and that will just give it that extra little bit of straightness. And when the light hits it, you don't see as many rolls. There's not shadows. That's usually one of the complaints we'll get, is that at nighttime the light will come in, it hits the ceiling at the right angle, and as the light comes down, it'll find every little roll, so there'll be little shadows in the ceiling.
Gotcha.
So that base coat eliminates that problem.
Gotcha. And we talked about 5/8 there, but here we're also going to do 5/8 on the exterior walls, right?
We are.
And part of that is, we have the insulated wall here, and when they do the wall, the insulators, there's a little bit of a camber here.
Yes.
So that when you put your board up, it's going to push that in. It's going to increase the density of
Yes.
the insulation and make that work better, but it can be somewhat of a headache for you guys, right? Sometimes, if those are overfilled or...
It is if they're overfilled. The board hangers will usually, what they'll do is they'll put extra screws. We use longer screws. We put more screws. The 5/8 will not follow the contour of the wall.
Right. So we're doing 5/8 on
5/8.
all the exterior wall
All the
because
yes.
we're not that the insulators did it wrong.
No,
but
no,
it's
it's
just
done
going to
perfect.
give us a better job on
Yes.
all of the exterior walls. And that wasn't, that's something I learned here. So, having pros like Mike say, no, we're not doing 1/2 inch there. We're going to do 5/8 on the exterior wall. These are the kind of contractors and such that we want to be working with, right? Like I always tell guys, you know, I've learned a lot in 30 years, but I didn't read it in a book. Yep. It's walking a job site with guys like you that say, oh yeah, on the walls when you're doing blown, do 5/8 and then do 1/2 inch. And so all of the interior partitions, we're just going to stick with our 1/2 inch.
We're going to stick with our 1/2 inch. So we want to keep the door jambs the same. Some of the doors, if we could use a 5/8, we will, just because they are going to insulate the interior walls as well. But we're going to use 1/2 inch and then we'll.
And those of you not familiar, when he talks about door jambs, our doors will sometimes come pre-hung. So there's the door slab, which is the actual piece that moves, but it's attached to the hinges, and the hinges are in the door frame, and they all come as one component. Well, those door frames are pre-cut to 4 9/16 typically. So that's your 3.5 inch stud plus the 15/16 or no, 1/16 added to it to make up for the board and the plaster that gets attached on that. So that's what we're talking about there. Lastly, let's talk about the attachment. So you do screws. I know some guys have done nails, which I don't quite understand in today's world.
That's kind of gone the way. Years ago, the hangers would use nails as a starting method. They'd put a sheet up.
Yeah, I see they always hit that one corner. They go to the other side, hit it, and now the board's hung.
And now they move on.
And then a guy comes by with a screw gun.
Me personally, we don't use nails on anything. They will pop. A lot of the times the nails will pop eventually. So when the house settles, those nails will go like nothing. So we screw everything. With the 5/8, we use 1 5/8 screws.
Okay.
With the 1/2 inch board, we use 1 1/4 screws.
Gotcha.
And that's
Is there a screw pattern that?
It's 5 on the ceiling. 5 on the ceiling and it's 4 on the walls. So we'll usually have a start on both ends and then we'll put 4. So we do 6 on the ceilings, especially when we're doing 5/8. It's a lot of weight with the plaster goes on as well. So we usually have 6 screws per run per sheet and then 4 on the walls.
And you know, like the plasterers, you know, people out there watching the video, like, and I only say this because I have tried it. It's like you sit there and I watch your guys work, and it's like I said, I'm always amazed because it's not only the speed they work, but the talent they work with, right? So you hear the screw gun. That screw gun isn't like on off. They turn it on,
they lock it,
and they just keep loading screws and going. And I have tried it, and like I bury the screw through the sheetrock. Like there is such a touch and experience to what all of your guys do here. It's fascinating to watch.
It's all the way from the delivery phase to the hang phase to the finish phase. It really is it's not the easiest trade, and it has to be a time lot. Like you'll see our delivery company. It's really important the way they get the board in the house. It's very difficult. I mean, these windows and these doors are so expensive. They have to carry all this stuff in by hand, and it's a real process just to get the board in the house. And once the board hangers are here, I mean, they make our job a lot easier. Where they set the screws to the right depth, because too thick, I mean, too deep, and it will pop.
Right.
Not enough. Now we're getting nicks on our trowels, and the plasterers are going to lose their
mind. They're hating on you. So yeah, it's. There's, you know, you have to service your own guys that are following right behind them.
No, of course. And in the plasters, as you'll see, it's a time learned. It's not something you can just pick up. It takes years and years and years to even become halfway decent at it. So it's an investment just with everybody.
And anybody that thinks they can do it, I challenge you. Go get a 4 by 12 foot sheet of drywall and carry it around every day for a week. Around the house and navigate through the doorways if you think it's that darn easy.
The board hanging is a young man's game.
It's a young man's game that I would think the retirement age is a pretty young one.
Yes.
In that game plan. But anyways, thanks for the education. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time and I still learn things. I greatly appreciate your wisdom and experience in talking, but let's go see him hang some board.
That sounds good. Thank you.
All right, buddy.
Yeah.
All right, Mike, we're in a room. We stopped your guys for a minute. Greatly appreciate that. I know these guys want to go, but we probably wouldn't be able to carry on a conversation if they're here screwing and routering out. But we have the back wall is done here.
Yep.
And you can see, you know, we horizontally railroaded it. The ceiling is always done first.
Yes.
Right? Is there a reason for that, or?
It makes the cuts easier when you're trying to cut the ceiling in. If the wall's already done, there's no room for error. So we'll put the sheets up on the ceiling.
And then you can, if it's like slightly out of square, you never see it.
Because the wall will cover that gap.
Because the wall will cover it. Plus the wall probably just like, you know, it's just easier to tuck that up. And if that ever did choose to sag, then you have the wall supporting that edge.
The walls hold everything together up top.
So ceiling goes in first. And so let's talk about that a little. You guys, I'm sure, are, you know, just deal with cuts galore in these, right?
As technology advances, there's more and more things.
There's speakers, there's lights, smoke detectors, all kinds of stuff that people are going in. And
we do a lot. We do a lot of cuts. We do a lot of speaker wires, obviously. So what we're doing here is this is a 5/8 blue board.
Gotcha.
The thicker option of the board is a little more true.
Yep.
And then they'll use a roto zip, which is the tool that they use to cut all these things out. So they'll mark them. They'll mark every object they have to cut out.
Right.
The sheet will go up over it, and then they'll put that router in, and it actually cuts out.
And then just basically they enter somewhere in the middle, and they go out to find the edge.
Yes.
And then they trace around it and push the board up against, and you can see, you know, we have really nice cuts around there, so we don't have these huge voids on the side of that. Now, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you, I can remember the days where there was a guy over there with the board and a guy with a tape measure calling out dimensions.
Yes.
And they were cutting out the ceiling holes and stuff. So the roto zip really helped revolutionize speed and accuracy in the same jump.
The roto zip is
you know, if you see this, you see it has a cutting edge down the blade, but the tip is not a cutting edge, right? The tip is basically a solid metal dowel, and that's what guides that around the inside of the wires. And also, by not having any of that cutting edge, you're not at the risk of, you know, cutting any of the wire or that inside the box. So you set that to the proper depth and then have at it, right?
We'll personally try to make sure the wires are pushed up before we lay the ceiling. Electricians are really good about it. They'll tuck their wires in.
Yeah,
tight.
they don't want to come back and have to deal with it either.
No.
So, and you don't want to have to be the one to explain to them,
Sorry.
hey, sorry, but we cut 3 wires and that.
It happens from time to time, but we try to avoid as much as possible. You know?
I gotcha. And so on the board here, we can see the nailing pattern that you talked about, or screw pattern.
Yes. So on these walls, because of the insulation, we're making sure we put the screws, you know, every 4 to 6 inches, really holds that insulation in place, and it gives us a nice true wall to put the finish on.
And because we have the owner suite, this wall actually did get insulated.
Yes.
We had board on one side, and then we insulated from this side, and now you guys are boarding. So technically it's inside, but it's acting like an exterior wall.
Yes, and it's a soundproof.
It's a soundproof that up the SDC rating.
Of course.
For the owner suite there, and then we have that concave joint here.
Yes.
That's where we're going to put that tape in, and we'll jump next door to Plasters are hard at work there, and as the board migrates, the plasters migrate too.
And you'll see as well with this, we'll stagger our joints. So in drywall or sheetrock application, they'll stand the sheets up and the joints go floor to ceiling. In our application, we go horizontal, and we never make sure we call these the butt joints,
Gotcha.
the 4-foot joints. These will never be stacked on top of each other. They're always...
Because you don't want to get that line that cracks down the whole wall. By staggering the joints, you can see, I get it. We have 2 feet over there, and then we have this 16-inch piece here on the butt joint.
Same thing on the ceilings. They'll make sure they stagger these butts as they go along. It's just like a bricklayer's pattern where they don't want to keep their joints all, you know, on the same row.
So if you have that kind of interconnection rather than just that standard seam butt connection that runs across the ceiling, that's just going to get you in trouble.
Well, when the house does settle, if it settles a little bit, if you have a floor to ceiling joint, that'll crack every time. It just Mother Nature will win, and it finds the weak spot on the wall or the ceiling.
I gotcha. So screws, screw gun.
Yes.
This isn't like a standard power drill.
No.
Right.
This is actually made. This is our drywall or our board installation gun. This has a depth setting on it. So what we can do is we can adjust our settings to how deep that tip is. So if we're installing screws, if it goes in too deep, they can remove this back a little bit.
Right.
Or if it's out too far, they can make it a little bit deeper. Because we need these screws to be exactly set just below the face of the board.
Yeah, you could feel as you run your hand over it, there's just the slightest dimple.
That's it.
at every screw head. And it is, I mean, it is extremely consistent as you run it over all of the screws, that they're all the same. And it's not like, you know, nailing up plywood sheathing where there's a nail positive here and then this one's sunk a 16th and that one's sunk an 1/8.
It's extremely important that these are set at the right depth. If they're too deep, they'll completely lose the integrity of the wall. It'll pop, it'll come off eventually, it'll come through. And if they're out too far, it will destroy our trowels. So our plasterers rely on them to make sure that the screws are in the right depth.
Yeah, understand the next step is, you know, taping in the plaster, but the plaster is working with a knife-like metal edge.
Yes.
So if he goes across there, if that is proudest a 64th, that knife edge is going to find it.
It'll put a burr on the trowel, and we've actually had it happen where we might get a nick in the trowel and they don't notice it at first. And then a half an hour later, you're looking going, oh, there's a
little line that goes right down the plaster.
So it's very important for us to make sure those are set at the right depth.
All right. Well, we're just going to keep migrating across the house because there's other great things happening on the other side. So let's go check in and we'll see the plasters. Now, the plasters are a different team. The guys that hang the board are not plasters.
No. The board hangers, they simply do the board installation. They're good at it. They're very fast. They'll hang. Their 4 or 5 guy crew will hang anywhere from 100 to 150 4x12 sheets a day. So a house like this would probably take them about 3 to 3.5 days to install all the board.
Okay.
And the plasterers, they just focus on what they do. If you ask the plasterer to hang a piece of blue board, you're probably going to get a side eye.
Yeah, I might as well hang it myself.
They don't want the board. They don't want to hang the board, and
they don't want to carry anything more than their trowel and their
that's it.
You know, spatula thing there.
That's it.
To hold the mud. So, well, let's go check it out.
Sounds good.
All right, so we're in a room here, Mike. This is just happens to be the master closet for the owner suite, and we actually have plaster going up. So, tell us a little bit about the sequence of how do these guys operate. It looks like sealing first, and then treating joints, I mean, talk to me about the sequence.
So the way we'll usually come in is they'll come in, they'll install the mesh tape. We'll put a base coat on all the joints first, and they'll come in, they'll do the ceilings first. Usually we'll work top down.
Okay.
Ceilings will go in. When the ceiling's done, they'll usually snap lines to make sure things are straight, things are plumb. As you can see, they're scratching the corners. They're making sure the corners are all mudded in, and they'll make sure these are all straight before they apply the finish.
I got you. Yeah. So okay. So by mudding in, you mean basically putting plaster. I mean, a lot of people here. The building industry has its own lingo. So we talk about mudding in. I know what you're talking about, but there's a lot of people out there that don't know. Like, what are they throwing mud on the wall?
So what we like to do is we like to get a coat on all the tapes. So all the tape we install over any joint, whether it's in the corners or it's on the open walls, we like to get a coat on everything first, and then we apply the finish after this will set.
Gotcha. And like you said, they work from the top down. And are there special guys on the team that have kind of graduated to, hey, this guy only does ceilings, or this is the only guy we allow to do ceilings?
So definitely, the guys when they start off as a laborer, then they'll move into doing small closets, then they work on the walls, and then as they get, usually at like lunch break, they'll work on practicing on the stilts outside, where it's a little safer, and then once they can walk on the stilts, as you can see, like Lucas here, he'll be troweling this out, but he's not looking down where he's going. He's walking the whole thing across. And the most important part is he keeps his hand still.
Right.
So as his hand goes across, he has to keep that hand level.
And you can see he's got like a little bevel to it, obviously, so he's kind of like plowing.
It's snowplow one side or the other.
The plaster, yeah.
So he'll walk this all the way across. But like I said, as his body goes up and down, his hand has to stay almost disconnected. So we make sure that ceiling's nice and flat, which takes some time to learn, obviously.
And it's safe to say that Lucas is probably one of your most talented guys, right? He's probably been with you for a while.
He has. He's been around for a long time, and he does a very good job. They all do a great job.
Right. But it's just, it comes with time.
Yes.
Right? I mean, the more you do it, and I'm sure he's been doing it a long time, so, having that experience and longevity just gets you to a point where, you become a pro at it.
With this too, it's one of these trades where you can't read it in a book. It's a feel, it's a muscle memory.
Yeah.
So it's one of those trades where it does take a long time to develop, and then once you have it, it's a very valuable to us, obviously. But
And I'll tell you, I mean, I know what, I have a number of builders, like we'll do like high-end wainscoting and all of this. And I know it's really hard that you talked a little bit about muscle memory, but these guys, you see the inexperienced guys, when they do the wall, they'll come down the wall and they pull away from the wall. And the same with the ceiling. So you end up with this kind of like little bit of a crown in the corners. Now when guys go to put in like a wood wainscoting, they're out there hammering it all out. So it's really good to have like the guy with that, experienced hand getting that beautiful, flush.
And level and plumb is really important to us. We try to make sure the walls are, the frame is always very good, but we try to bring it a little bit closer. Like for instance, we use 5/8 blue board on the exterior, on the walls we can. We use 5/8 blue board on the ceilings. It's a thicker product. It has fiberglass and it's a stronger product. It just makes everything a little more true. And then we also try to straighten the walls with mud as needed. If we see some kind of a hump in the wall, we'll usually straighten it with a straight edge, and then we finish it as well.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about this wall here in particular. So you said obviously you start in the ceiling, you hit the corners, and then we're doing joints here. All the board here has been, I call it railroaded, right? It's horizontal. Yeah. And so you treat the joints, and then you let that dry. But I noticed that after you treated the joints, one of the guys came by and he hit it with a paintbrush.
And what he's doing there is that when we put this first coat on, if this is too smooth, the second coat, the finished coat, won't adhere properly. It has a tendency to pop off. So we put a little bit of grit on it just so it has something to
gotcha. Yeah, I would call that, so you're putting a little micro contour onto that so that second, so it's almost like if you're doing stucco or stone, this is a scratch coat.
That's why we call it the scratch coat. It's a little bit of
got a little bit of a scratch to it so that it can bite. And even though we don't have plaster here, eventually that second coat is going to fill that void.
Yes.
And it's going to grab onto that scratch coat, and we'll have a full veneer here that's probably a 1/16 of an inch.
Yeah, 1/16 to an 1/8.
Yeah.
They do try to level it off as they go.
All right. Yeah, and you can see here, I don't know if we can capture that, but like the ceiling that he put up and then left alone, and then you can see the finish over here of just going back and forth. It's somewhat monotonous, but that's what you need to do.
So over the course of about an hour and a half, he'll trowel this ceiling out. So he'll hit this 5, 6, 7 times.
Right.
And what he does is right now, like he's throwing water at it as we talk. It just helps the plaster kind of fill in all the voids, take away the lines. And he'll keep this process going for probably another hour.
So is it safe to say that I noticed he hits the edge of the trowel with the brush before he goes and makes the next pass. So that just makes the plaster a little more soupier to fill in the cracks and get more of that glass-like finish.
Exactly. And also, plaster is very finicky when it comes to the temperature.
Right.
Really hot, really cold, really humid. It works a little different. So there are things that he's doing, adding some water where it doesn't tear on him and it actually leaves a nice finish. You can see how it tears right there as he's troweling it. And then as he comes back over it, it'll kind of fill it all back in again.
Yeah. And then he'll go back and we'll still hit that again.
Do it over
and he'll just keep hitting it with that water.
Yes.
And that water just keeps making it, and sooner or later it turns it into glass.
And you'll see the finished product when it's done. It'll have a shine to it when it's done.
I gotcha. So, yeah, and now they actually, tools of the trade. We have a corner tool.
Corner trowel will tuck that top tape in. You can see the tape is being covered by the plaster. And then after the fact, that's when they'll come back in with a line and they'll bring that line down afterwards. The corner trowel won't be used on the tops anymore. We don't ever put a trowel on a finished product.
I was a little hesitant to bring it up, but I remember years ago we did a project, and when the painters came in and they painted, I could see that 2-inch rim where the corner trowel was, right?
So what he'll do after he hits this is he'll usually take his trowel and he takes away that line. There's a line that is left by the corner trowel, and we'll try to take that away. We also do it on the bottoms because the corner trowel will leave mud in the corner and it builds up the corner just a little bit. So when the trim goes on, it leaves a little bit of a gap.
Yeah, it's harder to get that baseboard in because it's not that true 90 anymore.
So we'll cut that while it's still wet. We'll put a margin in there and just kind of tighten that tape back
up. Get that in there.
Because it does leave a little bit of mud on the bottom as it's done.
And these are all the tips that it's, you could come in here, you could blow through this and get out, but when you're in it for the client to get the best possible job, understanding all of these little tidbits so that you're leaving the proper product for the next guy.
Of course, of course. And LDS, they always want us to be at a certain standard for every project they do, and we know what those standards are.
All right. So why don't we take a break? We'll come back in a little later and check in progress on that ceiling.
All right, sounds good.
All right, buddy. We've returned. You guys did that first scratch coat and that, and I can see Lucas is up here, and I would just say he's refining the plaster on the ceiling, right, and finishing it.
So this is the final process in the finish. So we call this felting the ceiling. He has a,
Say that again?
it's called felting the ceiling.
Felting
We
the ceiling.
we hit it with a felt pad. So that pad he has in his left hand is it's like an oversized sponge almost that helps fill in all the little voids as he's troweling this in behind. So this will put a high sheen on it, and it fills in any last minute little imperfections as it goes.
And you can see it does create, like, it makes that plaster just have this slightest of films.
Yes.
And then he finishes it and follows it with the trowel.
Absolutely.
And then gets that kind of glass-like finish. Now, couple questions. How does plaster deal with seasons, right? I can't imagine like hot and humid August is the same as dry and cold February.
It brings some extra challenges. The best time to plaster would be the middle of spring or the middle of fall. The humidity is what really causes problems. So the air today in outside of Boston here is somewhere around, it feels like 80% humidity. So as the plaster cures, it wants to get the moisture out of the plaster. The plaster is now curing as we're finishing it. As this cures, it adds more humidity. When the air is already full of humidity, there's nowhere for that moisture to go from our finish.
Right.
So sometimes we get inconsistent finishes. Right now, this is drying a little bit spotty. That's why he's putting another hit on this now, trying to just work it all back in.
Okay.
It will dry all the same. It just might take a few extra days. Just as the humidity loosens up, we get better.
And I see he keeps, maybe about every fifth pass or so, he goes for a little dunk of the felt pad to moisten it back up and get it
Absolutely.
just right.
Absolutely. And we also have the issues in the wintertime where the plaster will actually freeze if it's below freezing and there's no heat in the house. Right. If we finish the ceiling and shut down for the day and go home and the heat goes down to freezing, the water will actually freeze inside the finish, and then it actually comes down off the ceiling or the walls. So we try to keep a consistent temperature if possible. Obviously today it's a difficult day to do it.
I want to stay out of Lucas's way. I don't want to get in trouble with Lucas.
No, he's focused and looking up on it.
He's definitely focused. I don't think he's looked down, a foot below the ceiling all morning.
No, he's finishing this one properly.
And yeah, I mean, you can already see like it's taking on that kind of glass-like finish here.
Absolutely.
As he keeps working it.
And you'll see it'll dry brown. It'll dry brown, and over the next 3 or 4 days, as it cures, it'll have a brighter white finish to it. Right. And then that's when you kind of know that you're ready for paint. We usually recommend about a week to a week and a half. It allows the plaster to really cure out, and then it allows the paint to marry to it properly.
Now, lastly, before we break off here, one of the huge advantages that I've heard about plaster that builders like LDS really like is, I mean, we've been here for the morning. Lucas has done the ceiling. He's about to finish up here in the next 10, 15 minutes.
Yes.
The ceiling's done.
Done.
All we have to do is let Mother Nature take over, dry it out, and what do we wait? Maybe 3-4 days before a painter could start hitting it?
Usually we'll try to wait about a week to a week and a half.
A week and a half.
The weather does play in that a lot. A cool, crisp night when the windows are cracked, it'll suck that moisture out naturally, and it cures a little bit faster. On days like today, it might take a little bit longer just for that to happen. And the humidity that this plaster will give off, it'll raise the temperature of a room 20, 30 degrees as it cures over the next day or so. And then that kind of dissipates, and then it's ready for the painters.
I gotcha. And drywall, they would treat the joints, then they got to come in and sand, which makes a mess. Yeah. I know they have sanders now with vacuums attached, and so it's not the old world stuff. But they have to sand, and then they let that dry or cure, however you want to call it, for a day or two, and then they'll come back and they hit it again. Yes. And then they let it cure, and then they sand it and hit it again. Absolutely. And so that to do a room like this stretches the process out to maybe about 5 days, 6 days worth of work. I mean, obviously they're going to do everything in the house, but it really stretches that schedule where veneered plaster, these guys are in here, they're doing their thing. They're in and out of this room in 1 day and they don't return.
No, they'll be done in 1 day. And I actually tell everybody, you know, drywall or sheetrock is more cost effective on large projects. That's why you see it a lot on commercial buildings. It's a little more cost effective. The quality level is much higher with plaster, but for smaller jobs, a bathroom in your house or a small kitchen, we can come in a day, hang it, plaster it, clean up, and we're done. The drywall, I might have to come back 2 or 3 times to sand, recoat, sand, recoat. So on the smaller projects, it is efficient, time efficiency. It's much better. And cost-wise, it's almost the same on smaller applications.
Gotcha. Well, Lucas, thank you. It looks awesome.
Good job, bud.
Mike, I can't thank you enough. You know, understand, Mike and his guys were here at 5:30 this morning, right? Woke up, they hung a bunch of board for us to get started early. Mike's a natural on camera, as you can see, but more importantly, he's telling you everything he knows about what his family has been doing for the last 90 plus years and the wisdom that he's accrued, right? This stuff is pure gold. A sincere thank you from me, the audience. Great job.
Thanks for having me.
I greatly appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you very much.
So, all right. So, all right, so hopefully you enjoyed that. What an exciting video. I was just had a conversation off camera with Mike. He is probably one of the best guys I ever stood in front of a camera with, and it was his first time, if you can believe it. He just did awesome. He's a wealth of information, but we got to close this video out. Let's go catch up with Jared. We'll say a few parting words. Hey, buddy.
Hey, Steve.
So, as you know and you saw, we just had an incredible conversation with Mike.
Mike is the man, isn't he?
Mike is the man. He's been working with you guys for a while.
Yep.
I mean, you guys don't even go, there's not a second choice. When it comes to plaster, Mike does our work.
That's it. We are very particular with the finishes. Mike knows what we expect, and he gives it to us almost every time.
Yeah, and you know, it's one of those interesting things, like there's some things we can fake.
Yep.
Can't fake this.
No.
It's in your face for the life of the house now, right? You're going to walk up, you're going to see the wall, the painter, you know, they're going to do their thing and make their paint job look good, but this stuff has got to be right. And I could just tell, not only is Mike a wealth of knowledge, but he just comes across as somebody who just loves what he does, and he cares about when he walks away that he's proud to say, my guys did that.
Definitely.
And I think, you know, younger contractors out there that are trying to be like, hey, how do I get, you know, to this level, or how do I get there? I think that's probably your first goal, is that you walk away from the job every day feeling like, I did that. And you can tell anybody you want, I did that, and be proud of it. Yeah. And Mike clearly is. But, you know, we were in here, a couple things before we head out. You know, Jesus and his guys did an incredible job.
Yep.
We had Timber HP. We made a switch here in the last couple weeks of moving to this wood fiber insulation instead of putting the cellulose in. So it actually has a negative carbon, like they call it embodied carbon number. So it's got a huge positive environmental impact. It's a wood fiber, and this is, I think, one of the first houses in America to get that. I mean, they just came online, just started the factory. I think other people have used it and such, but we're right up there in that leadership line, or the first time users, where we're putting that in. And Jesus and his guys, you know, one of the things, just like Mike, you know, Jesus, another contractor, no matter what we throw at him, he doesn't roll his eyes. He doesn't say, oh, I don't ever do that, or do I really have to do that? He just says, oh, You want to go from that to this? Not a problem.
Yep.
Let me contact them. Let me get the shipment down to our warehouse, and we'll be there on Thursday, and we'll install it.
So all our guys are super accommodating. Obviously, Jesus is at the top of the list, and these guys, and Mike. And this was actually a material that Scott found, and you got to give him credit. He wanted to reduce his footprint, and he found this material, and it's really cool. So far, it was awesome to see him blow it in, and looks like it's going to be a really nice product, a nice addition to the job.
Yeah, and I mean, someone that's been doing this for 30 years, I look at this and say, wow, I mean, this isn't the last time I'm going to use wood fiber. Right? I'm going to be looking at Timber HP. I want to find out more about this. Upcoming projects, I'm going to talk to them about, you know, how do we get this installed, talk to Jesus, and talk to Jesus. I mean, no matter how I bring that up, man, it always seems like a joke, doesn't it? It's like,
a good
hey,
point.
why did you use wood fiber? Well, Jesus made me do it, right?
Always blame Jesus.
Hey, Jesus was a carpenter. Wood fiber, there's a connection there.
We like it so much, we're going to put it on the interior walls as well and use it for sound.
There you go. And it does. It certainly upgrades that STC rating, which stands for Sound Transmission Coefficient, which is how you measure the acoustic quality of a wall system or a wall assembly. But anyways, Mike did a great job. You guys always doing a good job. Jesus, that's our board and plaster. Next up, you know, we're going to start talking about everything you're going to see and touch when you live in this house. Flooring, doors, trim, painting. Exciting times ahead.
Getting exciting. All the pretty stuff's starting to show up in the house, and you know, pretty soon we're going to start to see it take shape here. So
all right,
we're excited.
Thanks,
all right,
buddy.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, Build Show. Jared from LDS, Steve Basic Architect. We're out here at the Build Show Build Boston site, and that is our board and plaster video. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If you haven't watched all of our previous videos, go out there, check them out. They're on Build Show Network there under Originals. They're all there. You can watch them in sequence. If you have watched them, you know what I'm going to say. Science says watch them 7 times. So until next time, Steve Basic Architect.